I'd like to start with a poem that a couple of friends recently shared with me. Maybe you've seen it too as it's making its way around Facebook. It's called Small Kindnesses by Danusha Lamaris. I've been thinking about the way, when you walk down a crowded aisle, people pull in their legs to let you by. Or how strangers still say, "Bless you," when someone sneezes, a leftover from the bubonic plague. Don't die, we are saying. And sometimes when you spill lemons from your grocery bag, someone else will help you pick them up. Mostly, we don't want to harm each other. We want to be handed our cup of coffee hot, and to say thank you to the person handing it. To smile at them and for them to smile back. For the waitress to call us honey when she sets down the bowl of clam chowder. And for the driver in the red pickup truck to let us pass. We have so little of each other now, so far from tribe and fire. Only these brief moments of exchange. What if they are the true dwelling of the holy, these fleeting temples we make together when we say, "Here, have my seat. Go ahead, you first. I like your hat." My talk tonight is titled, "We're All on the Care Committee." Anne-Marie spoke eloquently about that, the history and current state of our official care committee. She's the chair of a very small group of people who have committed to providing care when a member of our Sangha needs it. She also mentioned that lots of cultures have very clear expectations about care in case of trouble. When I was a little girl, I loved reading about our pioneer culture. We tied a rope from the house to the barn before a blizzard so the strongest child could follow the rope to the barn and feed the livestock and make his or her way back through the blinding snow. When a family had a barn fire, people came from miles around for a barn raising. Everyone knew exactly what to do. The men raised a barn, and the women fed the men, minded the children, and comforted the victims of the fire. Many of our church communities have systems in place too. There's a death. No one in the family provides food for the mourners after the funeral. "There will be plenty of food," said the brother of my sweetheart. There were mountains of food, before and after the funeral. Sometimes people know just what to do. We don't really have that structure yet in our Sangha. But we can be closer to the tribe and fire that the poet spoke of. We have an opportunity to begin to explore what culture we want to create in our Sangha in case of need. And tonight I'd like us to start with the Dharma, of course. The Buddha taught, if you knew, as I know, the benefit of generosity, you would not let an opportunity go by without sharing. The Buddha taught and lived what is really a way of life, giving and receiving, the practice of dana. In the West, we often think of dana as the simple practice of offering a monetary donation to our teachers or to the organization itself so that we can continue to rent space, pay staff, and buy supplies. This, of course, is critical to our survival as an organization. But the Buddha was talking about something much more, generosity or dana as a way of life. The Buddha tells us the greatest gift is the act of giving itself. The greatest gift is the act of giving itself. He said that a true spiritual life is not possible without a generous heart. And so generosity is the very first parami. The word parami or paramita has a number of definitions. One by Ajahn Sucitto is crossing life's floods. Pema Chodron calls it going to the other shore. Not getting to the other shore, mind you, but going. On this shore, we're all messed up. We can be irritable, selfish, impatient, and foolish, all manner of unpleasantness. But on that shore, we're compassionate, generous, patient, and wise. I think of it as if our boats, no, I think of it as if our lives are little boats, and the circumstances of our lives are the weather and the currents. We can learn to become more skillful and calm navigators with practice, so that even the inevitable storms and floods don't swamp our little boats. It doesn't mean it's easy or that we ever really reach that shore, but we sure do have plenty of opportunities to practice. And as we do, our happiness increases. The path begins with generosity because of the joy that arises from a generous heart. Pure, unhindered delight flows freely when we practice generosity. We experience joy in forming the intention to give, in the actual act of giving, and in recollecting the fact that we've given, says Sharon Salzberg. Let's take a moment now of contemplation. Please recall an act of generosity you performed without thought of a quid pro quo. You expected nothing in return. It can be very small, opening a door for someone, offering a smile to someone who looked like they could use one, or something much grander. Look to see what your intention was. What moved you to think of doing that thing? How did you decide to go through with it? How did it feel to make that decision? What did it feel like to do it? How did you feel afterwards? How do you feel now as you recollect it? Take another moment and contemplate your own goodness in that process, as well as the goodness that you received from your action. Turns out maybe there is a quid pro quo after all. Someone once asked Gandhi, "Why do you give so much? Why do you serve all these people?" Perhaps surprisingly, Gandhi answered, "I don't give to anyone. I do it all for myself." The aim and the fruit of our dana practice is twofold. We give to help and free others, and we give to help and free ourselves. There's always a quid pro quo. And freedom from suffering is both what we give and what we get. Then there are the four immeasurables, or the Brahma Viharas. Loving kindness and compassion live on this list. The relationship between generosity and metta, or loving kindness, is pretty simple and straightforward. We see that others, just like ourselves, want to be happy and to avoid suffering. We wish that for them. That's metta. When we wish for another's happiness and see suffering instead, compassion, the quickening of the heart in response to another's suffering, arises. Compassion is in English a noun, but its true meaning involves movement, action. Action intended to provide ease of someone's suffering. So compassion moves us toward generosity of spirit, such as metta, or a combination of generosity of spirit and substance. Sylvia Boorstein has a practice of offering metta to other drivers when they're all stuck in traffic together. Or maybe we bring someone a meal, or hold open the door, or help pick up the lemons from the spilled groceries. This is one of those upward spirals that Pat Coffey speaks of. When we practice metta, we increase our capacity for compassion. When we feel compassion, we are moved to generosity. When we behave generously, we feel the spontaneous arising of joy. When we feel joy, we're more generous with ourselves too. So we're instructed to practice metta for ourselves, but this isn't a selfish practice. Without some loving friendliness toward ourselves, our resources are sorely strained, and we have very little to offer anyone else. So our loving kindness meditation includes cultivating love for ourselves as well as cultivating love for others. Our benefactors, loved ones, close friends, the neutrals, ones we don't know well or feel no particular affection or dislike for, and those with whom we struggle. What's it for? Loving kindness for ourselves fills the bucket. As we deepen our love and understanding of ourselves, we fill the bucket of love so that we can share it. We come to see ourselves clearly as a mishmash of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we become more able to have a friendly attitude toward all of it. Maybe we don't actually have any fatal flaws. With our acceptance of our own goodness, and our foibles too, our resources are strengthened and we begin to see all that we have in common with all others. They too are a mishmash of the good, the bad, and the ugly. If we can find some friendliness for ourselves, we begin to create a spacious quality in the heart-mind to feel friendliness for others. As we feel this friendliness for others, it fills the bucket again. Then with our buckets at a sustainable level, we have the capacity to look at others in struggle with some compassion. Compassion, as distinct from sympathy, doesn't separate us. We're all about bridging separation here at IMCC. Seeing the me in you and the you in me. Sympathy is, oh, poor you. Read, that could never happen to me. Or, thanks God I'm not you. Compassion, on the other hand, sees another's struggle through the eyes of love, of friendliness. Read, I see your struggle. I understand struggle. That's painful. How can I help? Some traditions say, there but for the grace of God go I. The eyes of compassion see our common humanity. The how can I help is central to the practice. Compassion is the quickening of the heart in response to another's suffering. We are moved, literally, to help. Just as metta, offered only to oneself, is a thwarted, unfulfilling practice, incomplete, just a very good and essential first step, so is compassion without action. What is it like to see suffering and be unable to help? We all know the frustration and terrible sense of impotence when we see a loved one suffering and we're unable to make the pain go away. We know our own suffering when we see suffering in the world, on the news, and we have no way to ease it. For me, one of those places is seeing the state of our families at the border. My own suffering is eased just somewhat, and only when I can take some action, no matter how small, attending a demonstration, raising some money, calling my representatives. It's a situation where my sphere of compassion far exceeds my sphere of influence, and that's painful. How fortunate we are then when our sphere of compassion intersects with our sphere of influence. How much happiness, sympathetic joy even, another of the Brahma Viharas, can we experience when we can actually do something to ease another's pain? We can more easily employ some equanimity here too. We know we can't completely relieve another of their pain. Pain just is, grief, physical pain, sorrow, and worry. And yet comfort from another matters. It matters to both of us. And so we have Sangha. We have each other, tribe and fire. Our learning the Dharma together supports all of us. That's why we come here on Tuesday nights instead of sitting at home and reading the suttas. Our teachers generously offer these teachings, and we offer dana, our heartfelt gratitude in the form of money. KM groups meet to learn and practice together in small groups because it helps everyone in the group. We are a Sangha, learning together for our own benefit and practicing for the benefit of all beings, near in the room and in our circle of family and friends, and far across the land, the sea, and the sky. We've explored a little the benefits to all involved as we practice loving kindness, compassion, and generosity. The gifts of generosity flow freely between the giver and the receiver. As we contemplate these practices, how might they inform us about what it means to ask for help? It is my contention that loving kindness and self-compassion might actually spur us to ask for help when we need it. If there is goodness and benefit to the giver in giving, it requires the willingness of another to receive it. And here is where so many of us stumble. We were taught early and often that it is better to give than to receive, that if we need help, we must question our own competence, that needy is the same thing as needing. We've got our own bootstraps, after all. Can we be generous enough to ask for help? Maybe you noticed some conflicting emotions in our earlier contemplation of your generous act. Maybe you weren't quite sure about your offering. Maybe you didn't know how it would be received. Maybe you noticed some fear, in fact. Maybe you noticed a little stinginess or grasping as you considered whether or not to be generous. And yet you had the courage and willingness to act generously. You decided to be brave and kind. And I dare say, and the Buddha agrees with me, that you both benefited from your action. So here's a radical thought, which logically flows in the Dharma. Ultimately, asking for help becomes in itself an act of generosity. It allows another to reap the benefits, all the benefits of generosity themselves. We get to love and be loved, a circle of loving kindness, a circle of compassion, a circle of generosity. This is a pretty short talk on a pretty big topic. We could conduct more than a few retreats on these contemplations and practices. We could even practice them for more than a few lifetimes. So now I'd like to invite you to explore them for a few minutes in small groups. Let's turn to each other in groups of 3, and Anne-Marie and I will pass out a contemplation for you to share. If you prefer to do this on your own, of course you're welcome to do that. When all the groups have received their contemplations, I'll give some very simple instructions. So please arrange yourself in groups of 3. So how was that? Does anybody have anything they would like to share? News, discoveries? Oh, thank you. Can you wait just for a second for the mic? We do that just for people who have difficulty hearing. It makes a difference.
Hi there. I think one of the
you.
things that came up in our group that was the common theme was our need, our pride and ego, wanting to do things ourselves, and then asking for help really shows vulnerability. And being vulnerable, allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to ask for help, is also a part of life. We can't always be the strong ones.
Right.
Sometimes life requires us to ask for help.
And it takes a lot of courage, doesn't it? Thank you.
It does.
Thank you.
I was in Dennis's group, and so when Mimi kind of shared, and it was interesting because I think it's like this flow, like asking and receiving, and so if you're just wanting to give it, but you don't want to ask for help, that the flow isn't gonna. And just like you said, all of us are on this care team and we each have gifts. But if we don't ask for help, then that other person who has that gift that we need, they're not going to be able to give it because we're not asking for help,
Right.
you know?
Thank you, Sue. Anybody else?
Thank you. It just reminds me, in my experience of getting help from the care committee last summer when I was having such a hard time from a lovely woman, just makes me think you think you're alone in your suffering until you start to have a conversation and we all share that we all suffer and there's understanding. And just that allowing the help to come in helps remind you that you're not alone, that we all share in this suffering, and what a valuable gift that is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Jackie. It's so hard to wait.
Indeed, it is. One of the things that struck me, because we were all similarly attached to the ego of being the helper in our group, was the word bravest in your handout and the prerequisite it seemed to have for me of trusting the relationship when
Yeah.
I learned to ask for help, that I could trust the other person to say no if they couldn't respond just as much as yes if they could. And that was a very important part of learning for me in my most recent experience of needing lots of help.
Yeah. That's a strong statement there. It is so important for us to feel safe enough to
Yeah.
ask. We need to trust the other person to be able to say no.
Yeah.
Yeah. It goes back to what your group was talking about with the person that always wants to be the giver. You know, the person who can't say no,
Yeah,
ultimately.
right.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. I've enjoyed the evening with you very much, and may it be of benefit.